Hello, Cleveland! Cleveland is the easiest puzzle to solve. That's why it took 20 years, two lawyers, some dude in England, an entire forum full of searchers to solve it. Cleveland's got a weird history as a puzzle. People didn't always think this was in Cleveland, which is odd because it's pretty freaking obvious it's in Cleveland in retrospect. When Brian and Andy were first looking at this puzzle, they thought it was in Philadelphia. They thought it was in Philadelphia because at the bottom of the painting there's a bell with an L beside it, and they said this is probably the Liberty Bell, and they were pretty close. But that had them going down Philadelphia, and actually, let's get into the story of how they changed to Cleveland a little later. First, let's just dig into how to solve this puzzle, or at least how it was intended to be solved. First things first, if you want to solve the Cleveland puzzle, you got to figure out where it's at, right? And in the painting, if you'll notice, there's an outline of Ohio. So now we're in Ohio. Great. But Ohio is a big state. Where in Ohio should we be looking? Well, if you notice up in the top of this painting, there's an outline of a building, but it's upside down. And that building is the Terminal Tower, which is a pretty famous building in the Cleveland area. Anybody who is from Cleveland who sees that, once they notice it's upside down, they're pretty well going to know that that's the Terminal Tower. It's sort of like the Statue of Liberty in New York or the Water Tower in Chicago. Now, Cleveland and Chicago are a little different. Chicago had latitude and longitude coordinates to point you to the right city, but this one, at first glance, doesn't appear to. You've got two numbers. You've got 1442, you've got 1881, but that's not the latitude and longitude for Cleveland. What are they? We'll get back to that. First things first, let's dig into the verse. There's a little bit of controversy with the Cleveland verse. Some people think you need to read it from top to bottom. Some people think you need to read it from bottom to top. Either way, it doesn't really matter because the Cleveland verse is so explicit. It's just a series of instructions that take place within an area like half the size of a football field. You really only need to move about 20 feet when you're in the Greek Cultural Gardens to solve this. So all of the instructions happen in a very close proximity, and it doesn't really matter which order you do them in. You always end up in the exact same place. So let's dig into the verse a little bit. The first two lines are, "Beneath two countries as the road curves," which seems a little cryptic, right? But not if you're from Cleveland, or not even if you're looking in Cleveland. Like if you were to ask somebody in Cleveland, where can I go and be beneath two countries? They're probably going to point you to the Cultural Gardens. So it's important to understand what the Cultural Gardens are. A lot of us are used to big parks like Central Park or whatever. The Cultural Gardens, it's a strip of land that is a series of parks. Now, those parks all represent different cultures. You've got the Syrian Cultural Garden, the Italian Cultural Garden, the African American Cultural Garden, the Greek Cultural Garden. We know from the litany of the jewels that this puzzle is the Greek puzzle, so we're obviously looking for the Greek Cultural Gardens. Once we get there, everything is dead simple. And actually, while we're going through this, why don't we take a look at the back of the Greek Cultural Gardens? As you walk up the curvy road, this is what you're going to see. The rest of the verse is as follows. In a rectangular plot, beneath the 10th stone, from right to left, beneath the 9th row from the top of the wall, including small bricks. 7 steps up you can hop from the bottom level. Socrates Pindar Apelles. Free speech, couplet, birch. To find the casque's destination, seek the columns for the search. Seems pretty cut and dry, right? Walk up these 7 steps, be in the planter box. Count 9 rows of bricks, that puts you down at the bottom. Count 10 stones from right to left and dig a hole. That puts you right here. And Brian and Andy did that. And they didn't find a casque. They dug that planter box all day long. So much so that Andy got bored. You got to remember, Andy wasn't really into this puzzle. He was just sort of along for the ride with Brian. Like Andy's been on all the TV shows and stuff, but he wasn't the secret hunter. He was just there with his friend. Like the Chicago guys, they were just having a fun adventure together. So Andy gets bored. And he takes his little probe and he goes over to the other side of the planter box so that he can leave Brian alone with his empty hole. And Andy just shoves that probe into the ground and he hits a casque. And that's how the guy that didn't really care about the puzzle became the finder of the casque. Now, we're left with a question. If we followed this verse to the T, we end up on the wrong side of the planter box. Why? What in this verse or what in this painting is telling us that we need to reverse the counting from right to left? What's telling us we actually need to count from left to right? There's two schools of thought on this. Number one, remember those numbers that we were looking at earlier? The 1442, the 1881. Those are not the latitude and longitude coordinates for Cleveland. Cleveland's latitude and longitude coordinates are 41 and 81. It's the first two numbers in that series mirrored. Now, is that what's telling us that we need to count from left to right instead of from right to left? I don't think so. That seems a little stretchy to me. That seems a little complex. My theory is the last line of this verse is seek the columns for the search. Now, if you look in this painting, there is a set of columns, and those columns are a one-to-one exact match for the columns at the Greek Cultural Garden. If you're standing at the back of this planter box, though, you'll never see those columns. They're on the other side. My feeling is Byron is trying to tell you, when you do this counting, when you start your search, you need to be at these columns. Because if you're standing at these columns and you count from top to bottom and from right to left, you end up on the correct side of the planter. Now, there's been a little pushback about this, but, you know, a little bit of added evidence or whatever to my theory is the verse also says Socrates, Pandar, and Apelles. Those are words that are on this planter box, but they are also on the opposite side of the planter box from where you dig up this casque. So why would either of those things be there? Those two lines, if you take out seek the columns for the search, you take out Socrates, Pandar, and Apelles, take them out completely, the verse still works, but you end up on the wrong side. So why put them there at all? Why do you need to be on the other side of the planter box if you don't need to count from there? And why do you have to seek the columns for your search? All right, now that we've figured out how this was meant to be solved, let's talk a little bit about how it was actually solved, because it's kind of a fun story. People have been searching for these puzzles for 40 years now. It took 20 years to find this one. We have college professors working on this, like multiple college professors. Brian and Andy, two lawyers. We have really smart people working on these. There's surgeons. I never went to college. Like, really, really smart people are working on this puzzle, and it took 20 years. So up until the aha moment for this puzzle, Brian and Andy were looking in Philadelphia. Now, they were looking in Philadelphia because in the painting, there is an L with a bell beside it, and they took that to mean Liberty Bell, which they were kind of right. John Palancar has since said that the road that the Greek Cultural Gardens is on used to be called Liberty Avenue. But it was changed shortly after the casque was buried. He said that he told Byron Price that the road name was changed, and Byron was like, great, that'll make the puzzle harder. Yeah, it will. Anyway, Brian and Andy were so dead set on Philadelphia that they were actually planning a trip to go there and dig. But just before they did, a British guy named Johann on Quest for Treasure had an idea that was just amazing. It was an idea no one had thought of before. It was an idea that broke this puzzle wide open. And that idea was he Googled the words in the puzzle. Like, Jesus Christ, guys, you guys are smart. You couldn't figure out Google? I imagine the whole scenario went something a little like this. These blasted Yanks can't do anything right. Bloody hell. And that was it. Johann Googled the words Socrates, Pandar, and Apelles. And the Greek Cultural Gardens had put up a website that was sort of explaining what the park was like, and they had listed those words. With that Google search, the whole thing was blown wide open. They saw a picture of the planter box. They absolutely knew with 100% certainty that this was in Cleveland. So Brian donned his white shorts and his pink shirt and got his friend Andy together, and they took a trip to Cleveland, and this happened.
And now, all of a sudden, on the other side, by chance, there is another hole. And it is, what time?
I don't know what time.
Sometime.
3:26 is when actually.
At 3:26, we hit pay dirt, so to speak.
And I'm digging
Just per
around.
chance.
I'm digging around.
We were poking around. Brian, who struck the top of the plexiglass first?
Mr. Andrew Abrams.
And Brian will always be fond of me for that, right?
Yep. Every time I look at the broken pieces of ceramic and plexiglass.
And now I don't have to think about the broken pieces of your heart. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
There is an actual plexiglass. There's an actual plexiglass box with.
Here it is. It's inside the box.
It's inside the box. Okay. Clean the cat's face off.
Hold on. It's not a cat. It's a fairy. I think it's a mermaid.
Hold on. I'm going to take a picture of you too in a second. You think it's a mermaid? Wait, what does that say? Birch?
I don't want that.
You definitely don't want the Pepsis.
And that was it. Puzzle solved. It was easy. It was simple. Once you get to the right place, just follow the instructions and then have your friend get super bored. The thing that I want you to take away from this, sort of the same in the Chicago video, was all you had to do was do exactly what the verse told you to. You didn't need to know anything about Socrates, Pindar, and Apelles. You didn't need to know their history. You didn't need to know the history of the Greeks. You didn't need to know the history of the Greek Cultural Gardens. The only thing you needed to solve this puzzle was a page and a half from this book. Hey, thanks for checking out this video. Click subscribe if you haven't already. Give us a thumbs up. Leave us a comment. Tell us how much we suck. Join our Discord to talk about the video if you want. There's links to all of our social media crap in the description below.